Okay, so today we're going to be speaking about fair trade and fashion. My name is Alexandra.
I'm Sammy.
I'm Brooke.
So I want you all to take a minute to think, if you've ever thought about it, who made your clothing. So like not where it comes from, like what store it's from, but who made it. Can I see like a raise of hands? Anyone? Okay. So this is kind of statistics. So did you know who gets the money from your typical $10 t-shirt? And as you can see, like the least amount of money usually goes to the workers, and the most usually goes to the retail. So you can see it's not a fair trade.
Okay, although there is not one universally recognized definition of what fair trade is, we found one that best fits our purpose of explaining what's kind of the injustice that's going on in the fashion industry right now. It comes from scholars Andrew Samuel, Fred Derrick, and Charles Scott, and they define fair trade as an organized social movement and market-based approach that aims to help marginalized producers in developing countries to move towards economic self-sufficiency and stability, not to international trade negotiations between nations. So essentially, this is a definition that does focus on the marginalized producers, which is where the injustices lie. And I know that oftentimes when we hear the word fair trade, we're thinking about chocolate or coffee, and I think a lot of us often forget that this is a huge problem in the garments we're wearing as well. According to scholar Paulette Stenzel, there are actually multiple principles that included in fair trade, which are fair wages, cooperative workplaces, consumer education, environmental stability, direct trade with producers, and multiple types of community development and support. So what's important to realize about fair trade and fashion is that we as consumers, and especially us who are a heavily targeted group of consumers, we actually have the opportunity to buy responsible, sustainable alternatives to sweatshop products. And I think in the course of our daily lives when we're shopping online, just running down Park Avenue, we're not really consciously thinking about this issue of where did our clothing come from. So that's kind of where this slogan, Wear Fair, comes from. And it's the idea behind our clothing that we actually do have the opportunity to make responsible choices. It is important to understand fair trade at the root level, which starts with corporate greed, but we also do need to acknowledge that we have power in this issue too. Companies will continue to try to maximize profit by selling as much for as low as possible if we as consumers are willing to buy these garments over and over.
So the garment industry is a huge industry worldwide, and it employs 60 million people around the world, a majority of whom are women, and 99% of clothes being sold in the U.S. are not made ethically. So pretty much everyone would own something that was made by made in sweatshops by underpaid, overworked laborers. Sometimes even including children, despite child labor laws. And between 2001 and 2011, across 15 countries, it was found that garment workers' wages had declined overall. So this just shows that this problem is not really getting any better, and the people that are actually making the clothes and doing the hard work are not getting paid nearly close to what the people that are taking credit for it are getting paid. And today, women in Bangladesh work to earn only $37 a month. So some of the major issues that we found that came up in our research are the idea of profit over ethics. So fair share is not given to the actual garment workers. They're not receiving fair compensation for the amount of work that they're putting in, especially when they're working under these horrible working conditions, such as long days, abusive supervisors, and unhealthy work environments. Poverty, prices, and wages is another major issue, which kind of ties into profit over ethics. Basically, just that the workers are not getting paid nearly anything, maybe at $1 most a day. And then the lack of credit given to these workers is a huge issue because they're the ones doing all the work and suffering through these hard working conditions, while the people higher up, like the CEOs of these major companies or the brands that are taking credit for this work, are the ones that are recognized and getting paid the most. And lastly, pollution levels and waste, which many people may not think would be a big issue in the garment industry. Actually, the amount of pollution and waste that comes from these factories that they're working in outranks most other industries. And about 1/3 of garment workers in India suffered from respiratory diseases due to these working conditions.
So this is just a small chart that we found. On average, Americans buy 20 billion garments a year. So when you boil that down, that's at least one new garment a week. And although outsourcing has become a huge problem to kind of speed up production and raise the profit margins for companies, it's important that we also realize that this is happening in our own country as well, which Alexandra will speak to a little bit more later. But something I kind of wanted to point to was the approximate wages on the far end, where you see that it says here, like New York, they have a higher wage, but we also have to consider that only 2% of our garments are being produced in the United States versus somewhere like Bangladesh or Cambodia, where the wages are much, much lower, and lower wages are leading to bigger problems in overtime, overcrowding, and unsafe environments. Really, the issue with fast fashion is, in the end, the people who are making our clothes are the ones who are really having the most negative consequences from them. The chart is closely aligned with researcher George Keynes and Joanna Roberts in finding that the big issue, that being capitalist production reliant on the exploitation of workers to generate profit surplus, is surpassed by an even bigger issue, which is that we as consumers are not readily acknowledging the link between our purchasing behavior and the living standards of those who are making our garments.
Social justice is defined as the fair and just relation between individual and society, and most often this is pertaining to wealth, privileges, and opportunities that people either do or don't have access to. And then social injustice is defined as the denial or violation of economic, social, political, civil, or human rights of specific groups in society based on the perception of their inferiority. So in the garment industry, the CEOs and people that are higher up are receiving more than fair treatment and compensation for the work that they do, while those on the lower end of the spectrum, which would be the garment workers, are receiving less than fair treatment and compensation. So this kind of relates to some of the topics from our class readings, such as the master-slave relationship and women as a marginalized group, because, as I said, women make up a majority of the people that are garment workers, and although their working conditions aren't fair, the women and those who are technically the slaves are forced to see the perspective of those people higher up than them, because in their position they can't really do anything about this issue.
So, like Brooke says, this is not just a problem in outsourcing, it's happening here as well. So we decided to narrow down the focus a little bit and talk about Forever 21, which their demographic, like target demographic, is usually people our age, college students. So in this picture you see, like, I made this for 60 cents and she bought it for like $50, which is not exactly the prices you see in Forever 21. but that's exactly what's happening in the factories in California. So I'm just going to go through some basic cases that Forever 21 has gone through with lawsuits. So in 2001, they had 13 Latino workers go and start to have a lawsuit with Forever 21. It was called Castro versus Forever 21. The case was dismissed in 2001, but in 2004 the case was reopened, and it was now no longer 14 workers, but 33 workers. And in 2004 the case was reopened and settled, and Forever 21 said that they were going to improve their workers' rates and kind of inform the people more about it, but they haven't really held up to their part of the deal. And as of 2012, they've had a lot of problems as well, and it said that Forever 21 refuses to talk about their supply chain, so they don't want to say where their factory workers are coming or how the wages are being worked. So this is kind of how unethical it is, and how, again, it relates to all of us, because we don't really think about this when we're buying clothing. We really just think about oh my gosh, this is a great deal. So you don't think of where it came from or how it could be affecting other countries or other people. And companies or corporations like Forever 21 are really taking advantage of people that are coming to the United States, immigrants, so Latinos and Thai people were the basic demographic for that case. And it was people that can't find work, so they offer them this work, and it's no work or 60 cents, so they don't have a fair chance or a fair fight. And the law, since there is no law for fair trade right now for garment wear, isn't really helping them out. So corporations like Forever 21 kind of can skip over that by just paying them out or saying that they're going to do something and they won't. But since their profit is so good, they can just continue to do that. So we as responsible citizens need to be aware of these things and kind of change our perspective on how we're buying clothing. We're not thinking about it as a deal, and I can buy a whole outfit for $20, but I could buy a pair of pants that's fair trade and ethically made and will last me for longer for $20. It might not be a whole outfit, but it's better in the long run. Okay, so this is another problem that Forever 21 had, and it's not just Forever 21, it was also Gap, American Eagle, I think Urban Outfitters. They all buy cotton, Sada as well. They all buy cotton for Uzbekistan factories, which the labor rights forum has already kind of called them out for, because in these factories, children still are working, mothers are working, and they're all picking cotton. So it goes back into what Sally said, the slave and master kind of relationship. And then there was an article in the New York Times that talked about why are we still purchasing Forever 21 or fast fashion, and it's really because it does appeal to us in all the right ways. It's cheap. It goes with the trends. It's not like other fashion lines that have the spring collection. It goes with the trends that they see going and appealing to the market. So it hits in all the right places. So it's hard for us to stop, but I feel when you get more awareness is created about the situation, because again, we don't think about these things, the perspective would change. So this is a little quote that I found from the fast fashion revolution, which was started in 2004 in London, and it says, fast fashion is like fast food. After the sugar rush, it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. And this is kind of talking about what Brooke said, that we usually think about food, and we think about what's going into our bodies and how that's affecting other people and how that's good for us, but we don't really think about fashion that way. So we need to change that perspective and start looking more into what's going into what we're wearing and how it's being made. So this is a video that kind of shows how awareness changes the perspective of people when they find out what's going on in the fashion industry. like their perspective completely changed from the oh my gosh, this is a great deal, €2 for a shirt, to oh wow, like this is what's happening and it doesn't align with my moral or ethics, so I'm not going to do it anymore. So the social awareness aspect is really important in what we're talking about for fast fashion and fair trade.
Okay, so now that we've given you guys a negative example of what's going on with fair trade in the fashion industry, I think it's important also to draw attention to companies that have had success with promoting fair trade. So this one is a U.S. company. It's called Indigenous, and it was recently kind of acknowledged for their work in the fair trade industry. And for almost 2 decades, over 1,500 artisans in South America from the poorest regions have participated in their supply chain. And what one of the scholars that we researched found was that this model that they've adapted is actually a business model that can be easily replicated in multiple companies. So that's kind of what gives it its power and what can make it easily adaptable for multiple other companies. And they rely on 3 key things. One, which is continuous monitoring and promotion of artisan rights and workplace engagement. So it's kind of thinking about how the people are all coming together in this community, and it's not just like one person working for this minimum wage. They're continually like talking about the workplace environment and making sure that everyone has what they need to make these responsible garments. And second, transparency, which allows the workers to share their story with the people who are buying their products and us as consumers to understand where it is that our clothing is coming from. And third, just being consumer engagement and really allowing us to recognize that the quality of our clothing is more important than the quantity.
So these are some examples of how it's both a social justice issue and as well as a charity. So for example, the video that I showed you had donations that go to help people that are in these kind of conditions. So a donation would be a form of charity because it doesn't fix the problem in the long term like we saw in our readings, but it fixes it like in the short term. Another kind of charity would be like the Fashion Revolution, which is kind of these videos to make people more aware, which isn't again fixing it in the long time because people can just kind of avoid the video or like forget about the video. Like the video isn't going to be there every time you go shopping. So that's kind of a charity as well. And then another idea, so these are both ways that people can help. And then the other idea is like don't throw your clothing away, which is kind of charity as well, but it's going into like secondhand stores and like thrift shops because like Sammy said, like clothing is very like pollutes highly as well because we just kind of throw away whatever isn't in the next season and they get taken away to other countries such as like Africa, and that completely messes up their textile industry. So we also need to be aware of that as well. So those are ways that you can help through charity. And then there's like justice issues going on as well because policies definitely need to be made and laws need to be made as well, kind of regulating these industries and corporations. So the Fair Trade USA, which was opened in 1988, I believe, is now working on adding their tag to fashion clothing as well, so garments. So they have like Fair Trade Cotton, Fair Trade Sewing, Fair Trade Factory, Fair Trade everything, and it's like a huge tag that people can put on their clothing. And it's not exactly a law, but they're working on creating policies as well. So.
And then a quote we found from our research, 3 researchers, Sarah Lyons, Sarah Aylshire, and Alexandra Sion, said that purchasing fair trade garments can serve as an act of solidarity with producers in less developed countries. So basically just saying that if we kind of unify and address this issue together and recognize what we can do to help, then for those that are being victimized in the garment industry in less developed countries.
So just basically to wrap up the whole presentation, we hope that the next time you go shopping, you think a little bit about like who made your clothing.
And kind of think about just quitting or stopping perpetuating the cycle and make some more responsible